Hey, what's going on, everybody? Andrew here, back for our build review show. It is Thursday, May 15th of 2025. And on this show, I bring users' builds up live on stream, giving them personalized feedback and advice about things I think that they can do differently in their builds to help improve their post-contest sim ROIs and ultimately help them to build and submit stronger lineups into their contests. So we typically do this show once a week on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. Had to move the show up a day so I didn't have to cancel it because I won't be able to do the show tomorrow. So we're going to be doing the show today on Thursday. Appreciate you guys accommodating me with the schedule change and still tuning in to the show. For today, we have a couple of reviews on deck, some MLB and some League of Legends. So excited to do both of these reviews. Why don't we do the first one, which is going to be for Todd, and this is going to be the MLB main slate from this past Tuesday. So let's get SaberSim up and let's jump into this first review. All right. Bring this up. Cool. So first review today, again, MLB on Wednesday. We're going to start in the contest tab. All right, so looks like they played the MLB Minimax and nothing else here. Looks like they actually did okay. Personally here, this is not how I would recommend entering contests, is simply just playing, this 150 max. What we really recommend is sorting your lobby, right, when you're going through here and sorting it low to high, and then just starting with some of the smaller contests and then working your way up the lobby here. Also trying to mix in some single entries and 3 maxes. So like, let's say that, okay, my balance today is $75. All right, I might play 1 or 2 dime times because they don't all open at the same time. They open throughout the day. So like maybe when you're looking at it, there's only like 2 open. Okay, I'm going to put in some dime times, check. And then I'm going to put in the quarter jukebox. And then I'm going to put in maybe some entries into the mini max here, but at this point I haven't entered any single entries or 3 maxes yet. So okay, maybe I'm going to come up a little further, play like this $1 single entry, play this $1 5 max, maybe this $1 3 max, and then maybe go back, right? Okay, so like now I've entered 1 single entry, 1 3 max, 1 5 max, that's $9. I've entered 2 dime times, so that's $13. I've entered a quarter jukebox, that's $18. And then maybe with the remaining $57, I put all of those entries into the mini max, right? Maybe I do something like that. Maybe I put 20 entries into the $1 mini max and then the rest of the entries into this one, right? So you're not maxing it, but you're getting some exposure to both contests, right? There's a number of ways to do it, but basically we try and recommend getting, exposure to different types of contests, not just only 150s, not just only 20 max, but some single entries and 3 maxes, some 20 max and 150 maxes. And that's just an example of how to do that. But, think about, considering that advice. I would definitely recommend it. It's what we recommend here. So anyways, let's go to the contest that you did play. And let's go over to users. All right, California Crusher 150. We're going to sort by sim ROI. I'm going to reset these columns just to what I'm used to seeing. All right, so good news here. They entered really good lineups, and that makes sense given, it's interesting. Their actual ROI is about 5%. Their sim ROI is about 5%. So you don't always see this, but it is nice to see sometimes. They are actually 1, 2, 3, 4th here on the list in terms of sim ROI. They are the 4th highest sim ROIer here. That's really good news, right? If you are in the top 10 to 20 sim ROIers, you are doing something right. If you're in the top 5, you're definitely doing something right. So lineup characteristics, high average salary, right? 49.7. We have a 0 average dupes, sim average score of 104.8. Seems like there's a ton of variance here in sim average scores, which you do see in baseball, these more correlated sports, right? We see 102.56. We see 111.72. So like a really big range here, right? Between the sim average scores, and that's okay, right? But they're right in the middle of the pack. 104.8 is like, right in between that range there. So got to be happy with that. Is a good thing overall. We're not going to learn a lot more here in Flashback, but let's go and see what they did in their actual builds to help them achieve this outcome. All right, so these lineups came from build 2. So we will go to build 2, which is the last timestamp here. So timestamp wise, right, built lineups 7 minutes prior to the first game starting. So that tells you that they have a nice lean process that they're using. So that's good, being able to, build your lineups very quickly. All right. So let's let this build load. And what do we see? So we see a high min salary, right? 49.5. They've bumped this up here. That's probably consistent with their average salary and their sim average score being in line. So that's good news. They use direct fill. Makes sense. They're only playing one contest, so no reason to use autofill. They use 3 uniques. That's good. They have average projection and some ROI aggregate metrics. So using these to analyze their lineup sets. Okay. Batter leverage is here, right? 15% or less. Pretty flat. That's pretty good. Go over to pitchers. Couple stands on pitchers, right? Couple stands on like Cease, Brown, Kodai Senga, right? All of these guys. I remember Cease and Brown very, very high value compared to the other pitchers on the slate. And then taking a shot with Senga as well here too, right? So all this seems fine to me. I don't see any issues with this. They even put some minimum exposures in here. Like, hey, let's get to, 40% Cease, 35% Brown, 15% Senga, right? I think this is okay, right? It's okay to have opinions. And these numbers aren't unreasonable, right? They're all really close to their ownership. If you pull this over, 38% ownership for Cease, 40% min exposure, 31% ownership for Brown, 35% minimum exposure, right? So they're basically saying, hey, I at least want to match the field on these guys, if not get extra exposure to them. So this is all good with me, right? Working in some opinions seems good. No min or max exposures that I can see here in the batters tab. Nothing in any individual tabs. Stack exposures, no adjustments here, leaving all stacks viable. Nothing in games. We do see some adjustments here to teams, and I actually kind of like the adjustments, right? Because if we just sort by projected runs, they're basically limiting themselves, or they're limiting the number of stacks they're allowing for the lower projected teams, but they're still allowing some. Like, hey, I don't want that many lineups from these lower projected run teams, but I'm okay with 5%. I'm okay with 10%. I'm okay with 15%, right? So all of this, I see it as just risk management, and I think it's good, right? And then they end up with more shares of like some of the better plays on the slate here, but taking some shots on some of the lower projected run teams, just managing their risk overall. So all in all, I think this is a very strong approach for anybody looking for, tips and ideas. I would say that, check this out. This is a really good approach, and I'm happy with it. The only thing I might recommend here that I'm not seeing is if you wanted to run a late swap before these like late games kicked off, right? So like there are 4 games that are later in the slate, and they are there's like a big time gap here, right? So like 407, 410, 415, all kind of close, 440, 505, 510. And then there's a big like hour and a half gap to 640 where 4 games kick off, right? You could run a late swap at this designation right before these late games kick off to account for all of the things that have occurred in the games that have started at lock, right? These games might be really close to over. The games that started at 4:40, 5 o'clock, right, might be like 4 innings in, and some stuff might have happened here with batters hitting home runs and pitchers, right? So you could take advantage of the live projections and the live ownership for the games that have played a significant amount before this late window, just to re-optimize your lineups, in case, you have some lineups with a shot that maybe, you had some contrarian stack do good and you don't need to get so weird on like the late slate. Just kind of take the information that's out there and use it to further make your lineups better, right? So that would be probably the one thing I would recommend here is consider a late swap in this window. And this window is going to vary, right? Slate to slate. But even like a day like today, I think there were like 3 morning games and then kind of like a big gap and then one game at like 3:37 Eastern time. Like you could late swap before that one game and take advantage of everything that's happened in the early games, right? After there's been a couple hours of games being played. So like that's like another thing to consider. But that's what I would be doing here. Just trying to work that late swap piece into it simply to take advantage of it. And not to say you're doing anything wrong, but just looking for always ways to micro improve here. Other than that, really good decisions. Really happy with what I'm seeing here. All right. That was a really good review. And we are going to be switching it up here and moving over to League of Legends. So this one will be fun. So we're going to be jumping to the 5/12, which would be Monday here. Monday LEC slate. All right. And this one's going to be for Studberg. So let's go over here. And let's get SaberSim up. Cool. So we got this up here. Let's go to the contest tab. Okay. Interesting. I don't think they imported their entry file here because the contests say 0. But I do think that they played this contest and used this contest sim. The only benefit, the major benefit here really of importing your file, even if you're already playing this contest, is to quickly fill your lineups from the build, which we'll talk about in a second. We should still be able to see the results. So if we go to users, let's see if we can find them. Not entries, username, stud. Okay, Studberg, 14 entries. So then I think that was the max. So let's go to people who entered 14, sort by sim ROI. All right, so where are we at? So Studberg, negative 17% sim ROI. We'll talk about this and look into it a little bit more. Kind of interesting because their average salary is right in line. Average dupes is 3. Their sim average score is like really high at 577. And if we look at like the top sim ROI sets, 542, 586, 548, 572, 591, it's really just these top 4, 542, 586, 548, 572. So it's not to say like they're not in line here. When you see stuff like this, sometimes you have to look like a little bit closer to figure out why their lineups seem to be a little bit different. What I would normally recommend is looking at their exposures and their stacks. Okay. So we come in here, and what I would do is look at ownership, exposures, leverage. And then what I would also do is like look at like macro lineup components. Okay, so Stud played mostly 4 3s and 4 2s, basically exclusively, right? Exclusively 4 3s and 4 2s. They played 100% MKOI. And then 58% GX. 42% TH, and then 0% RGE. Okay. We go to players. We go to captains. Kind of flat here, but mostly MKOI captains. So MKOI captains. Some leverage here, not a lot. A little bit on GX. So my guess here is that just like Saberson doesn't really like MKOI. But we're going to find out. All right. So we got some of this stuff written down so we can compare. Now, what I would do here, right, is like, okay, I've taken what they've done and I've written it down. Now let's go and look at like what some of the best lineup sets that graded out well, what they look like, right? Okay. So they mostly played 4-2s and 4-3s as well. So like our error isn't coming here, or not really error, but just like a difference. Okay, they played a lot of MKOI and a lot of GX too. They got to a couple of RGEs, but not that many. Okay, we go to captains. Okay, MKOI. We see GX. A little RGE. We see like a ton of GX top, and then way under on MKOI top. Pretty flat in jungle. Leverage on GX mid. Leverage on RGE. A little bit on GX. So this is kind of interesting, right? Because, and we might have to look like closer. And I want to go back to stud. Okay. And then let's go back to our health. So the biggest thing that I'm seeing here, right? And this is like the differentiator for me because it's been pretty hard to find it so far. The top sim ROI, although they do have a lot of MKOI, they have a lot of 2 stacks and 3 stacks, right? Most of their stacks are the smaller size. And Stud here is playing mostly 4 stacks. So it's not to say like they were on the wrong game, but they stacked them differently. And it seems like this seems to be the big factor for me, right? Because if we go to players and we go to like positions, right? Okay, Stud had leverage on top MKOI, mid MKOI, and like those are okay, top and mid, right? Top and mid. And then we go to our health. They are way under on top MKOI, like way under, way over on GX. And then they're like neutral with MKOI and over on GX. So seems like the top sim ROI lineups opted to play MKOI, but play them in a different way. And in my opinion, that is like the biggest difference here. So far, like what I've seen, and we're just going to use our help here, is bigger GX stacks, smaller MKOI stacks, and then we've seen a little bit of the opposite. So that tells you that that's kind of a good thing, right? Because that means like they're like really close and they're like really not that far off because their lineups are similar, but like some small differences. And then it was basically the opposite. It was big MKOI for Stud, and then small GX. Okay. So let's go into this build that was used to run these lineups, because we have some ideas here of why these lineups are different. And then let's look at like some of the actual like projections and things like that. Okay. Let's bring this down. So MKOI, huge favorite, right? Massive favorite, minus 1248. GX was a small favorite at money line, like minus 135. Let's look at ownership of these teams. I want to go to GX. Okay. 28, 21, 21, 21, 24, 30, okay. 35, 47, 42, 47, 41, 25. Okay, so here, right, it seems like MKOI's ownerships are like double that of GX, right? Everything is like 47, 42, 47, right? And then you go to GX and it's like 28, 21, 21. So the spots that we saw were different, right? Were like top and mid. And it seems like the builder is basically opting. Actually, let's look at both these teams together. It's like, hey, we understand that, you know, MKOI grades out better here projection wise, but the ownership that you like assume is also just a lot. And it might be better to take some shots on some players here that are not going to be so heavily owned, right? That's kind of the conclusion that like I'm getting here. And like when you look at the actual scores versus the projections and the ownership, kind of makes sense here, right? Like GX, okay, Lot scores like 73, and then Merman gets like 79, right? Small salary discrepancy, but you know, bigger like ownership discrepancies, right? Especially when you look at like their like mids here, like even like their jungles here, right? Isma did like really, really good. So I think like the builder is basically optimizing for the scenario where like, hey, you can get, you know, Isma in certain sims, right, at like half ownership, and they still do well enough, often enough to either like be close to MKOI's jungle or even like do better than them, right? I think that the ownership here really is the driving factor of why the builder likes the bigger GX lineups stacks as opposed to the bigger MKOIs. So that's what I would probably be looking at a little bit more like in my lineups, is maybe like my exposures here. Let's remove these, edit, reset, apply. And again, what I'm trying to do, right, is I'm trying to interpret why my lineups grade out worse than somebody with like similar, like kind of like macro type of characteristics. And so far, this is just the conclusion that I've drawn. But you would basically have to do this, take the information, apply it, and then see if you get a different or similar result the next time around, right? Like, okay, you know, I've like looked at this and I've noticed these things. And like these leverages aren't terrible for like some of these players, but I think that it really just comes down to the stacking decisions. What else do we see? We see Saber score. This is something else that I might consider here, right? Is that when you use Saber score, we try and recommend staying within like the top 25 to 50% of your lineups. At a min unique of 4, that puts you all the way down at like lineup 321. I would say this is like maybe a little bit too high. I would probably walk this back and go to 3, because this gets you to lineup 70. So with like contest sims, right, we have like a very clear definitive marker of like, hey, you know, this lineup is negative ROI at, negative 1% ROI, right? With Saber Score, we don't have that like very clear measuring stick. So we need to be a little bit safer. We need to be a little bit more careful. Now, in my experience, if I put on a ROI greater than 0 filter, it'll filter out somewhere between 30, 40, 50% of my lineups. So it's safe to say, like, hey, if you try and stay in the top 25 to 50% of your pool with Saber Score, you are more likely to be playing positive EV lineups. Okay, that's why we make that recommendation. So here, right, I probably would have used a min unique of 3 as opposed to a min unique of 4. So that is probably the other change I would have made here. But overall, I think that what I've kind of taken away here is one, watch your min uniques and like how much you use. And then 2 is be aware of like the teams that you're stacking and their ownerships, and, possibly try and like balance that out, or like maybe not get like too much leverage there, and try and find like some other spots to take some shots on where, the team might not be like a great favorite, but they do have a chance of winning here, and they could be a really good play at, half of the ownership that you're going to get a different team at, right? So those seem to be the big takeaways for me. Try those things out. Let me know how they go, and we can always circle back and do another review. All right. See a couple questions here. I'm not going to be making any picks here for tonight. Chris, I know we've done this one like a few times, man, and I think it is time for you to take the reins and figure this one out by running a build and seeing how things look on the other side. So I'd be interested to hear who you end up taking and how it ended up going. But I know we've done enough of these reviews that you know what I'm going to do here. So take it over and let me know who you end up rolling with. Pope said, seems like you need to nail a guy that hits a home run. Maybe not. That's why I always recommend playing more lineups, right? Get more shots on goal. So, those dime times, those quarter jukeboxes, the 5-cent contests on FanDuel are all good things to play. That way you don't have one lineup, and if you don't get that guy with the home run, you're kicking yourself. So more lineups at lower stakes are always going to be better. All right. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll be back Monday, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next office hours. So until then, everybody, take care. Good luck. Thanks. Bye.